Good morning. I'd invite you to open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Last week we looked at a text in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and I thought we might roll with another lesson in Ecclesiastes and consider how this book is introduced by somebody who is summarizing for us the things that Solomon found throughout the book. And that's what the first 11 verses of Ecclesiastes does. Have you ever had a time before where you were reading from the Bible and you got very sad and depressed? Shortly after I became a Christian, I had printed out a table of contents of the Bible, and I wanted to quickly read through the whole Bible. One older preacher told me that imagine it's like trying to get all the edge pieces on a jigsaw puzzle. Like, just get the big picture understanding of the scriptures. And then after you've read the whole Bible, then try to start filling it in. And so I took that advice, and I read through the Bible quickly. And after I had done that, I started looking at the table of contents again, and I kept asking myself the question, which of these books do I know the least about? And whatever book I knew the least about was the one that I was going to start to read and reread and reread and try to understand it in more depth. And that was the first year and a half or 2 years of me being a Christian and how I approached my Bible study habits. After I had read the whole Bible and I was starting to try to tackle the book of Ecclesiastes, Samantha and I were in college. And we were on our shuttle bus from where the dorm rooms were over to where the place was that we would eat. And Samantha noticed that my countenance was very sad and depressed, and she said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Well, I started reading the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's really frustrating me right now." I didn't realize at the time the trajectory, really, of the book of Ecclesiastes. If you go to a doctor and they have to set a broken bone, or they have to cut a tumor out, they have to cut you up. They have to do something that's going to involve some kind of recovery, some kind of stitches. You're going to need pain meds for the things that they're going to do. But it was ultimately good that they set the bone like they did, or that they cut that thing out of you that was otherwise going to harm you. What the book of Ecclesiastes does is, to the degree that you're worldly, is the degree that it's going to hurt you. Because what it's doing is it's cutting out from our hearts the amount of things that we strive for, that we try to find meaning and fulfillment in, that will not ultimately do it. And this book punches us in the face, and it says it's not what you think it is. All of these things in life that you think are going to satisfy you and fulfill you, it doesn't work. And if you're a worldly-minded person like I was when I was reading the book of Ecclesiastes and trying to study it in depth, that's why I was sad and upset. It reminds me of 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, where Paul tells Timothy that you preach sound doctrine, and there's going to come a time where people will not endure sound doctrine. What kind of stuff do you have to endure? You have to endure eating healthy. You have to endure working out. You have to endure when your plane flight is delayed, like things that are difficult. And then the Bible also says that there's going to be some people that just don't want to endure sound doctrine because it's going to show you things about yourself that you don't like. What I want to do in this lesson is I want to read Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. And as this person is introducing Solomon's findings, he summarizes what the whole book is about. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting in verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new'? It has already been done in ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." Ecclesiastes is so unique to any other book of the Bible that if you didn't know that this was a book of the Bible and you overheard somebody reading it, you might think that this was some ancient Greco-Roman philosopher. Throughout the book, one of the things that makes this book unique is all the questions that Solomon raises in it. 32 times in the book, there's one question after another that's getting people to think about their convictions and what it is that they really believe. 2 times in our text, in verse 3 and in verse 10, there's going to be some of these questions that we see. My degree in college was paralegal studies, and which a lot of people used as a pre-law degree at that school. And so there's a lot of people that the professors, they tried to teach a lot of the classes as if they were law classes because they were dealing with a lot of law kind of things. And in the classes, we kept talking about the Socratic method, which is where the teacher asks questions to the students rather than just disseminate all kinds of information. And it's interesting to me that before Socrates or Plato, there was King Solomon who was teaching in this kind of way and asking question after question after question. But it's ironic that in verse 1 he's called a preacher. The words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Well, typically when we think about preachers, we think about people that are lecturing. We think about people that are making one statement after another and backing up their statements with all of these proofs and all of these arguments that's supposed to get you to change something in your life. But what Solomon does in the book of Ecclesiastes is he keeps asking question after question going, what do you think about the world around you? Have you thought about where you're really finding your meaning in life? And it's pushing people to the limits of their understanding of the world. And the preacher in this book is acting in that sense more like a philosopher than he is a preacher in the way that we typically think about it. But what is the question in this text? The question of gain. If you look at verse 3 again, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? You might have had a very busy week. You might have had to travel for work. You maybe had to fight traffic, at least if you were on Scottsville Road, like all the time. And you go to work, you punch your clock, you do the work that you're supposed to do, you have dinner, you put the kids to bed, and then you go to bed yourself, and you do this every single day, all the time, and you're exhausted, and you don't get enough sleep, and you just... What's the purpose of all of this? What's the gain that we get from everything that we do, from all the toil at which we toil, from all the efforts that we're putting into all the things? What does the word gain mean? The word gain means leftover or profit or what the thing that's permanent and lasting. Of all the things that you did this last week, can you answer the question, what's permanent and what's lasting about anything that I was doing? And that's what Solomon is getting people to think about. That's what this book is getting us to think about. And all throughout the book, there's some people that try to find their meaning in this or that. Has that been you, by the way? Have you asked yourself the question, have you thought deeply about what the purpose of all of this is? Or have you just been distracting yourself, not thinking deeply about any of those questions because they're kind of depressing to think about? If your friend said, hey, I want to meet you at the park at such and such a time, you wouldn't just go, okay, sure, why not? You'd say, well, what for? When it comes to any small thing that we're going to do, we want to know what the purpose is. Hey, you should maybe start working out. You should get more sleep. Well, what's the purpose of all of these things that I want? If I'm going to go to that restaurant, I'm going to look at reviews of it because I want to know that it's actually going to be a good meal. I'm concerned about the bottom line of so many things that I do. But how many of us stop and ask ourselves the question, what about the totality of our life? You're concerned about why you should have done this thing or that thing or gone to that store or done that activity. But do you ever ask yourself, what's the gain of everything I do in my life? And that's what this book opens up by giving us a survey of. What the book of Ecclesiastes is showing is that Solomon is doing this experiment where he uses this phrase, under the sun, in verse 3. What gain does man have with all the toil that which he toils under the sun? That phrase is used 25 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And what does it mean, under the sun? Life lived without reference to God, which for the modern person would mean, I don't believe God exists. And maybe what Solomon means by this is, yeah, we believe God exists. We don't really believe there's a final judgment day, but we believe he at least started things and got it, like he wound up the clock and he just kind of lets it go now. Maybe that's more the idea that he's thinking. But whatever way it would be, the bottom line is, under the sun is life lived without reference to a God that's going to judge you one day. A lot of people in our culture today would look at a worldview like that and say that it's educated and sophisticated. Remember when I was in college, there's a lot of people, a lot of professors, a lot of students that would talk about how as technology has advanced, as science has advanced, it shows that there's less and less a need to believe in God, because science can answer all of these different questions that we used to want to know answers to, and philosophers have predicted for a long time now that as science advances, we're not going to need religion anymore to answer those questions. And so in a lot of academic kind of circles, it would be looked at as uneducated and unsophisticated to have anything other than an under-the-sun perspective. But if you were to ask yourself then, okay, what are the ways you can try to find meaning in life apart from God? And ask yourself, does that sound sophisticated at all? Look at verse 9 again. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? Well, doesn't that seem obvious? Didn't Apple come out with these new, weird goggle things that cost $20,000 that people are just going to be sitting on their couch all day long and just whatever they're doing? Isn't that a new thing that came out? How can Solomon say that people don't look at things and go, see, this is new, when clearly technology has changed over time? Well, how about we think about it like this? There's maybe two ways to think about this. Whatever that weird thing is that Apple came out with, are people still going to do the kinds of things that they've always done with that? They're going to get work done. They're going to entertain themselves, whatever. When the cell phone came out, did it really radically change what people fundamentally do? They communicate. Maybe they do their banking on their phone now, but you always had monetary things that you did. So whatever new technology is coming, a new blender comes out, well, it's just another way of eating, but people have always eaten. And maybe that's part of what he means by this. But more to the point of what we're looking at in this lesson, there's nothing new under the sun with regards to philosophical thought. Every generation just takes old ideas and repackages them with new terms and new books with new covers that look like it's something new and exciting, but it's not really anything new. So under the sun, life lived without reference to God, what are some of the ways people try to find meaning and fulfillment in their life? And the first one that we can see in this text is the answer of humanism. You see it in verse 4, you see it in verse 11, and you put up a term like, okay, well, what does that mean? Humanism means that I'm going to leave the world a better place, is basically what that amounts to. If you believe in Marxism, you believe in the writings of Karl Marx. If you believe in humanism, you believe in human beings. You believe that we can answer all of life's deepest questions. You believe that if we pull together, we can get everything figured out. And so the way that this looks in the life of a lot of people is, yeah, I don't believe in God, but what I do believe in is I believe in making the world a better place. So I'm going to volunteer at food banks. And I'm not doing this because I believe in God. I'm going to write an email to one of my favorite teachers from high school and just try to lift up their day. I'm going to go to Starbucks, and the person behind me, I'm going to pay for their drink. And I'm just going to try to I'm going to try to leave the world a better place. And the gain that you get from that worldview is that you feel like you've benefited the world. Now, what are the problems with this perspective? If this is what you're trying to do without reference to God, what are the problems with this? If you look at verse 11, There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. Do you know who your great, great, great grandparents are? I don't know the names of mine. Maybe there's some of you who do, but we just go back a few more generations, and certainly you don't remember them. And whoever those people were, they mattered in the time in which they lived. They needed to work. They needed to take care of their kids. They mattered in their workplace, but their time is gone, and none of us remember those people anymore. There are people that we know reigned as kings in different countries and nations in the ancient world, that the only way we know that they did is by scant archaeological evidence. They found some little thing that has some name of somebody who's apparently a king, and other than that, we know nothing about these people. If your mission in life is, I don't believe that I have to answer to God. God just seems unsophisticated. What I like the idea of is leaving the world a better place. Look at verse 15 in this chapter. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. Do you know what the world can do? The world can diagnose if there's something that's crooked. There's injustice over here. There's world hunger over there. There's these other things all across the world that we need to worry about. If you take a psychology class in school, oftentimes what they'll be able to do is help you understand that there's something wrong with you. But in verse 15, what can they not do for you? They can't straighten you out. They can't fix the problems. Our world, our psychologists in our culture, our scientists in our culture, a lot of these people can do a great job of diagnosing what's wrong, but apart from God, they don't have any good ideas on how to actually make things better. And some of you have heard me use this as an illustration before, but let's say that I adopt an under-the-sun perspective, and I just want to make the world a better place, but I don't believe there's any God. If you were on an airplane and it was coasting and it was going to crash, and you used the bathroom, and you know it's going to crash, and you're like, okay, well, I got 5 minutes before I die. I'm going to go ahead and use the bathroom really quick, and you open the door, the little thing, you don't know if you pull in or out on those things because they're sometimes different or whatever. So you use the bathroom, and it's really loud when you flush the toilet, and that hurts your ears. But anyways, when you close the door, the lights don't come on. And so you immediately open the door in your frustration, and you go to the steward person, and you say, the light's not working in the bathroom. We got to fix this. And then the steward person says, why does it matter? Because we're all going to crash and die anyways. If your worldview says that a solar flare is going to destroy the earth, or some giant catastrophe is going to come and destroy everybody, why does it matter to you that you leave this world a better place? Nobody's going to remember anything that you do in a couple generations. Much less when this solar flare happens or we all die from something, nobody's going to remember a thing that you did. So why does it matter? Under the sun. Notice the next perspective is the answer of hedonism. And you see these worldviews illustrated in this passage. And hedonism is to say that pleasure is my highest goal. Okay, maybe I'm not going to leave the world a better place, but while I live here, I would really like to just find as much pleasure as I can find. And sometimes this takes the form of like the obviously bad kind of sinful activities, like somebody's going out and getting drunk, and they're going out and having all kinds of promiscuity, and like those are oftentimes the way that we would think about that. But how about this? Here's the more nice version of hedonism. I don't want to go out and murder a bunch of people. I don't want to go out and do all that sort of thing. What I would really like to do, though, is I would really like to just have a nice, beautiful family. I'd like to just have nice things. I mean, what's wrong with having nice things? I want to have really nice house, really nice car. I want to dress really nice and impress people with how good I dress. And so that's where I get my pleasure. Both could be forms of hedonism, and you could do both of those things without reference to God. And there's a couple problems with this philosophy. In verse 1, the guy that's introducing Solomon to us, he's saying the words of the preacher. I'm telling you about the words of the son of David, king of Jerusalem. He's king, which means that he's got all the resources at his disposal. How many of you are going to have all those kinds of resources at your disposal, where you can do whatever you want to do to try to find all the pleasure in life that you can find? If you look at verse 8, you'll see what Solomon found. All things are full of weariness, a man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. I think the eye, the ear, not satisfied with hearing, not satisfied with seeing, is a way of illustrating that no matter how much pleasure I tried to find through the music I listened to or through the things that I saw, none of that stuff was ever enough. I remember one time in California, and I was doing a devotional Bible study with the high schoolers. We did it every other week. And when we went through the book of Ecclesiastes, I said, what are some things that you see people wanting to see and they never see enough of them? And one girl raised her hand and she said, memes. Just keep scrolling on social media, and one joke after another, one thing, and it's just doom scrolling or just looking for things that are lighthearted, just constant, and there's never enough of it. Solomon, what he ends up doing in this book, and he tries to find fulfillment in having wisdom, having wine, having all the women that he wants, having all the wealth that he has, his work, trying to be well known. There's like 7 different things that begin with the letter W that he's trying to find fulfillment in, and none of these things he finds fulfillment in. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself, but behold, this also was vanity. There's a guy that I studied with in Atlanta who used to be homeless, and then he became a bouncer at a brothel, and then in Philadelphia. He grew up in L.A., then moved to Philadelphia, and then he moved to Atlanta. And one of the smartest guys I've ever known. He becomes a lawyer at age 40. And then we start studying the Bible together. Now he's in his 70s. And whenever we're studying, he pointed out what Solomon pointed out here, where he said, I've had all the money I've ever wanted to have. I've been with all the people I've ever wanted to be with. I've had all the drugs that I've ever wanted to have, and none of this is satisfying me. Can you take it by faith, if you've not experienced all of that Solomon and other people in our culture, why is it the case that so many people in Hollywood that have all the things that you've ever wanted, why is that so many of them end up either committing suicide or they have deep depression kinds of issues? Is that not a lesson screaming at you that when you say to yourself, if I just had blank, then I would be happy? No, you wouldn't. Because that's not where life is at. Notice the third philosophy is the philosophy of nihilism. And if you don't know what nihilism is, it's the same thing as existentialism. And if you don't know what existentialism is, it's the same thing as saying this: I accept life as meaningless, so I create my own meaning in life. I look out at the world and I see that it's a cold, cruel place, that everything's going to be destroyed one day. I'm not going to leave the world a better place. I understand that trying to find pleasure that ends up becoming like a drug addiction. So how about this? I just accept that life is meaningless and I grin and bear it. Verses 5 through 7 shows this. The sun rises and the sun sets. The wind blows all over the place, and it just keeps blowing all over the place. In verse 7, all the streams of water run into the sea, but it's never full. It just keeps going back in, and it doesn't seem like it's accomplishing anything. And it's kind of like, what's the point? The nihilist says that there is no purpose to life, and you just have to accept that. You got to get to work every day. You got to fight traffic. You got to put food on the table, and it's all ultimately for nothing. I've known a couple people who would use this term for themselves. Oh, I'm a nihilist, and it sounds very sophisticated. I remember I had some friends in high school that were nihilists, and what's funny is that a lot of these people were still very interested in what's wrong in the world and trying to make the world a better place. But still, even within their worldview, it doesn't make sense to do that. Friedrich Nietzsche said this, and this is a confusing quote: every belief, everything you believe, every time you consider something to be true, it's necessarily false because there is simply no true world. And that's deep. And then your question back to Friedrich Nietzsche is, well, is that true? That one is just clearly not fitting how we were designed. In this text that we're looking at, Solomon says, vanity of vanities. Vanity is like vapor or smoke. He'll say later on in the book, it's like trying to strive after the wind. When I lived well, never mind about that part, but I've never known anybody who had a wind collection. You ever known anybody that they got like a plastic baggie? I try to have to say my A's the right way because I'm from Minnesota. A plastic baggie, Ziploc baggie. There we go. Or something. And so I'm going to go on a trip to Hawaii, and here's my air from Hawaii. And I'm going to go on another trip to Maryland, and so here's my wind from Maryland. And look at my wind collection. Isn't this pretty cool? You know what Solomon is saying? Is that if you live life apart from God, the only thing you're trying to do is grab the wind, and it goes all over the place, and you're never going to catch it. Why is it the case that in our culture, as people detach more and more from God, there's more and more mental health problems? I'm not saying, by the way, that anybody who is a Christian will never have mental health problems. That's not my point. But if you look at, in our culture, the amount of suicide, the amount of SSRIs, the amount of all those different sorts of things, and if you say that there's not a connection between people being detached from God, then you're not looking at a book like Ecclesiastes. Again, I think that there are brethren that can struggle with things like this. But culturally speaking, you have to reach the conclusion that there are people that think that they can live life apart from God, and the only thing they have for it is a Ziploc baggie filled with nothing. Go to chapter 12. If all these ideas are insufficient, we're forced to ask ourselves the question, well, if life lived apart from God is going to be like that, I got to accept that and let the surgical knife come and remove that cancer or set the bone in the way that it needs to be set. The last couple of verses of Ecclesiastes can seem so anticlimactic because they're quoted so often, but look at verses 13 and 14. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, or the King James says the whole of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Really? This is the conclusion? The end of the matter? I mean, it seems like there's so many exciting things in the world, Solomon, and are you sure that you really tried all of those things out? And the end of the matter really is to fear God? To have this deep reverence for God? Well, yes, because let's say that you're a nihilist or you're a hedonist and you're trying to find pleasure in this little garden that I have in the backyard. Okay, if you're living life without reference to God, the only thing you got is the garden, but the person who fears God gets the garden plus the God who let you make that thing. A deep reverence for God, which translates also into keeping his commandments. Well, this seems even more boring now. Because like all those other things that Solomon tried to find meaning and purpose in, that sounds more exciting. One of the biggest lies Satan wants you to believe is that true life is not found in God and that God's trying to take life away from you. Imagine for a moment that Thomas the Tank Engine, there's a clear lead into Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas the Tank Engine has looked around, and every time he's on his treks across wherever in the world he's going, he looks out at the roads and he goes, how come those cars have more freedom than I have? And then maybe he goes by a big lake or an ocean and he goes, how come those boats can turn any which way they want to turn? And I don't have that kind of freedom. I'd really like to just go off the rails and I'll find all my greatest freedom by doing that. And then as soon as Thomas, and I think there's actually a version of that book, the series, I think there's one called Off the Rails, if I'm not mistaken. And if you try to go off the rails, you're going to realize that you can't go anywhere now. Because your greatest freedom is found within the rails of what God has given you. If God has created you, he knows what's best for you. And every time somebody tries to go outside the boundaries of what God has said and say, I'm going to find meaning in this, I'm going to find meaning in that, and it has no orientation towards God, every time you end up realizing in one way or another, this is not where life is. The way that Thomas the Tank Engine would find his greatest flourishing would be within the rails, because that's what he's designed to live within. But it's not just that you keep the commandments, it's also that there's judgment. Really? After all of this experimenting, fear God, keep his commandments, and then there's judgment. Which at the end of the book, this is not a downer. This is not Solomon going, well, this is so depressing that there's a final judgment day. This is a breath of fresh air. This is something that's a relief in the findings that he's had, because if there is no judgment day, that means that nothing that you do matters. But when this text says God's going to bring every secret thing, whether good or evil, into judgment, what he's saying here is all the things that you do when nobody else is there, all the times that you've wondered, is all the things that I'm doing really matter for anything ultimately? The answer is yes, and it's because there's a judgment day. Everything you do, you're going to have to answer to God for one day, which could be a sad day for some people, but a great day for other people. Because the reality of Judgment Day means that there is ultimately justice. Everything I ultimately do does matter. And if you take Judgment Day away, then you take all of those things away as well. Solomon says that there's nothing new under the sun. Until one day, Jesus came, and he lived life in this world filled with people that were trying to live life without reference to God. And those who trust in him and believe in him, 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. If you want something new and refreshing, something that will reinvigorate what your meaning and purpose in life is, live life with reference to God. And by the way, this is something that anybody in this room could be struggling with. We can get so entrenched in all the things that we do in life that we just stop really making God our greatest passion. And we effectively become hedonists or nihilists or whatever that other one was. Think about two different ways that you can get to know somebody. Have you ever known somebody that meant a lot to you and they died? And when they died, it made you appreciate certain qualities about them that you miss in a way that you never really appreciated when they were there. And then another way that you can get to know somebody and appreciate somebody is by being around them and proactively thinking about what you appreciate about that person. Everybody in this room is learning something about God right now. You're either learning something about him by you having him dead to you, and you're trying to find meaning in all kinds of things and it's not there, or you're learning something about God because you're proactively seeking him and wanting to know about him, and because of that, you're appreciating him more and more. Which way are you learning about God right now? Is it because you're detaching from him or because you're seeking him? We're about to sing the song, His Grace Reaches Me. If there's anybody here this morning that needs to begin seeking God, think about what your life without God has done for you. It's not given you the answers that you wanted. It's not given you the satisfaction that you know that you were designed to have. It's not given you the meaning that you've needed in life. Understand that life lived apart from God is ultimately futile. Come to God and let him give you everything that you were designed to have while we stand, while we sing.